Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Legends of Runeterra deck tech. Been a while since my last deck tech, but we just got some cool new cards and I came up with a pretty cool and promising list that I want to share with you guys that I think will be one of the potentially primary homes for the new Champion Aphelios. So before we dive right into that, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below if you haven't yet to not miss out on future content. And now we're going to take a look at the deck and I'll break it down for you. Okay. So first off, this is an Apehlios Ezreal deck, so it's very similar to, say, Targon Ezreal in its core and its core gameplay and game plan. But Apehlios adds a lot more value and power to a deck like this than Draven could, and with the recent nerf to Farron as well, that makes potentially shifting towards Targon even more appealing. But I'll get into that in a moment. So first off, we have the usual sort of units you would find in a PNZ Ezreal type deck, together with some Targon options. So first off, we have Ballistic Bot, just a great unit. The 3 health makes it pretty decent on early defense against small units, and also makes it a little harder to deal with, like you can't just Mystic Shot it, for example. And the biggest part obviously is it creates free cards, both free Nightfall enablers, free cards for Rummage, and also free cards that deal damage, buff Ballistic Bot, and trigger Ezreal later in the game. Then we have Mountain Goat. I'm currently pretty happy with 2/2 drops. Mountain Goat is a bit better board presence on 2. It also pressures harder, unopposed, and also generates free cards for all the purposes that I mentioned before, except they don't go away at the end of turn, and they are burst spells and have a bit more utility, I would argue, than the ignitions from Ballistic Bot. So all in all, a pretty nice card to have. Then we have the 2 champions, Aphelios and Ezreal. Not too much to say about here, other than in regards to Ezreal, we could technically look at other potential champions as a second champion, like Zoe is one that comes to mind. But I think if you are in Zoe Aphelios, you're probably looking at sort of a different deck, maybe like a Targon Allegiance deck, and I'm not even sure how good that's going to be, but that's certainly directions worth exploring. But I think in this deck doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But we still have a couple of PNZ champions. First off, we have the recently slightly buffed Victor, which I still think, like I said in the review, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. He's just not that appealing. He's just a forecast unit. He's not particularly powerful or impressive. He can do some nice stuff and he's a solid unit, but in terms of a champion, it doesn't add anything too unique or too special to a deck, other than just kind of like a big board presence type of unit over a couple turns. Then we have Heimerdinger, which is something that I've seen a couple people mess with, and one of the more reasonable options here. But I think in the end, if you look at it, Ezreal is cheaper. He's arguably in a way more powerful. He's especially also more flexible. He's a pretty good unit since he got changed. He's still a decent win condition, or like helps with the winning quite a bunch. He generates like early on sort of board control card advantage with the Mystic Shot ability. His champion spell being Mystic Shot also makes him a bit nicer in multiples, while Heimerdinger is just all in all like pretty clunky. And that's a big part of why I settled for Ezreal, also because Aphelios has a bunch of target things that further help level up Ezreal in due time. And the fact that we want to be an Improbulator deck if we are a PNZ deck at this point in time, I think, because I think it's actually like one of the really powerful things to do in the game, Improbulator, and Ezreal plays really well with that for obvious reasons, being a 3-cost champion. And the other option would be Vi, which kind of is in a similar boat as Heimerdinger. She does some pretty good stuff, and there's some minor synergies with Vi and some of the Aphelios weapons. The +2/+1 and Overwhelm is nice to sort of just try and 1 or 2 shot the opponent, and the health option is nice to sort of heal her up with her tough and then heal you up quite big. And I think I like Vi even a bit better than Heimerdinger, but I'm not sure. But in the end, once again, the reason I opted for Ezreal over Vi is kind of the same as with Heimerdinger. But once again, I think Vi might make a little more sense than Heimerdinger, especially now that Hush also got nerfed and is, as a result, probably a little less popular. But yeah, those are kind of the realistic options for a deck like this. And I think Ezreal kind of just makes the most sense out of the three realistic options of Heimerdinger, Vi, and Ezreal for such a deck. And then we have the good old Sump Dredger to make use of our 2-drop free cards, and just being overall a pretty good 3-drop that further lets us dig through our deck. Then we have the spells. First we have the usual removal suit that you would find in a PNZ deck like this. 3 Beam, 3 Mystic Shot, 3 Get Excited, 3 Tri-Beam Improbulator, and currently 2 Static Shock. And if you want to count Hush as a removal, also 2 Hush. With the nerf to Hush, we pretty clearly don't want 3 anymore, but I still think we probably need 2 against decks like Lee, which can be pretty rough, even with Hush, possibly. And overall just being like kind of a solid catch-all. And while the fact that it costs 3 is still a nerf, it also at least comes with a little perk here in that it's now helps our Improbulator again. So the fact that we have to pay 1 mana more than before is mitigated a little bit by the fact that it makes our Improbulator more reliable. And yeah, I only have 2 Static Shock right now because, first of all, the deck doesn't run Noxus, so there's no Scorched Earth and no Flocks, so there's less value in Static Shock. There's also no House Spiders, so all the things that make Static Shock particularly good aren't here, and it's still a solid tool to help Ezreal level and just overall a card that can be pretty powerful. So having 2 seems like a pretty reasonable number, but you don't need to like go out of your way to find room for 3 without Noxus, I think. And even in my Noxus variant, I have leaned towards 2 at them lately, simply because I needed the space for other things. And then we are left with some utility or like velocity type stuff. We have our 3 Rummage that are arguably even better here than they are in the Noxus variant due to Ballistic Bot and Mountain Goat. And good old Guiding Touch. We have a fair share of like 3 health units where Guiding Touch does some solid work. And it's never really bad. It's certainly not the maximized in this deck compared to some others, but it's a pretty good card. And also like just the burst, the fact that it's burst, the fact that it's flexible and that it replaces itself. It's nice for Nightfall. It's nice for leveled up Ezreal later and stuff like that. Just does a bunch of nice stuff for free. And then we have Pale Cascade. Despite the nerf, I think Pale Cascade is still similarly good in a deck like this, especially because a deck like this usually didn't care too much about the +1 extra attack. Sure, there will be situations where it matters and it's not completely irrelevant, but the core functionality in decks like this usually is the +1 health to get like one of your units out of range of stuff, or like the +1/+1 that kind of lets you eke out a combat where you would otherwise trade. And it still does most of these things in this deck, just falling short in some situations where you try to really trade up where before it would have, and now doesn't do that well anymore. But yeah, I think this is the kind of deck and use of Pale Cascade where the nerf has the least impact, basically. And yeah, that's the deck list. It's actually pretty straightforward. You just kind of play all the sort of good cards for this kind of strategy. You lean into like a lower curve for Apehlios and various other things like Tri-Beam Improbulator, and yeah, just kind of max out on like the good sort of high quality value proactive units like our 2-drops here and some Treasure and stuff like that to sort of beat the opponent down a bunch. And Apehlios Crescendum weapon virtually increases the density of our units, so does Improbulator. Which I think also a part of why having 2 2-drops is good, so that Crescendum, even in longer games, reliably gets you bodies on the board. And both of these bodies scale pretty well in the late game, especially Ballistic Bot. So yeah, the deck just manages to play a really low curve, while being very flexible, very grindy. Aphelios is a monster, adding a lot of card advantage to the deck and a lot of utility. Like the common cycle, like weapon rotation that I usually do is you get, say, Crescendum, phase into Calibrum, or you start with Calibrum, then phase into Gravitum, and then into Crescendum. Basically, you want to usually like rotate between like Crescendum, Calibrum, and Gravitum, and only like branch out into Severum, and very, very rarely into Infernum in a deck like this, to sort of heal units or, I don't know, finish off the opponent, or like lifesteal if you're low. So yeah, Infernum is like the least used card basically, but Severum comes up a bunch because it adds +2 health to a unit to virtually heal it, and it adds lifesteal, so it gives you more life gain options in addition to Guiding Touch. I found that actually probably if you don't absolutely need to start with Calibrum, you want to start with Crescendum, so you can immediately get Calibrum afterwards to get like the 2 sort of extra cards out of it, while Gravitum is just sort of tempo, virtual like card advantage. Calibrum and Crescendum both provide you with a real 1-for-1 trade for free, which is super powerful. So even if your Apehlios dies quickly, you're much more likely to get 2 free cards out of your Apehlios, which is where his power lies. He just generates so much card advantage. Apehlios is pretty pushed, and I could see him, or rather his weapons, be toned down a bit going forward, because I could totally see him being too pushed. Especially the fact that Calibrum, for example, deals like 3 damage for just 2 mana and stuff like that. It's just quite pushed. So could totally see them, for example, considering to go down to like 2 damage on Calibrum, stuff like that. He is a bit too efficient and too powerful, generates too much value, I think. It's also really not very hard to generate these phased weapons. So yeah, quite the beast. And I've been having quite some success with the deck, and really like how much can there go wrong if you just take the tried and true sort of proactive Ezreal Draven formula and replace Noxus with the new Targon tools and a much more powerful champion than Draven. So yeah, this is the deck. If you have any questions or any feedback, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll be right back with 4 games in Masters Ranked to show it in action, show you how to pilot it and how it plays out. So don't go anywhere just yet, and stay tuned for some Masters Ranked games in a moment.